right, the Danny Porter prosecutor asked for a moment, so we're going to come out and talk. Jonna Spilbor has joined us here on set. Gabriel is still with me, so I have two experts. I want to bring them both back in. And one of the things I want to talk about, Jonna, let me start with you. Talk again about this defendant, and she is sitting there. We've seen her on camera. She again's doing nothing. What does this mean?
This is really crazy, and not in the legal sense of the word, because this is a death penalty case, and it's completely unusual to have a defendant representing him or herself ever in a serious case, but most especially in a death penalty case, Ashley. This is akin, in my opinion, to her simply pleading guilty really slowly. She's mounted no defense whatsoever. We're waiting for a ruling on a motion by her standby counsel to come back in, and I think maybe they're not here because we haven't reached the penalty phase. That's when they want to jump in. But this is very scary. Might be working to her benefit, and then again, maybe not.
And so let's go back to court and listen to some more of the testimony. We'll come back out and talk to the panel later. Jonna, sexy wife. That's what he called her on his texts. And I got to tell you, you know, my bother in this case, and based on his testimony, is I think he chose her over his own daughter, Amani. What are your thoughts?
And I think that's why these texts are relevant. You know, to continually hear that. He must have had her as sexy wifey in his cell phone, right? So to hear that if you're a juror over and over again, knowing that not only is there a dead child, but these people tried to burn her in like treated her like trash, literally. And I also think one of the relevant text messages was it struck me that they cared about their other children a heck of a lot more than they cared about Amani. And that just adds fuel to this fire. Obviously, no pun intended there at all.
Well, let me ask you this. So you talk about that, the difference between the children. So we know that the other two children are the biological children of the defendant, Tiffany, and the father of all three children, Aman. But Amani is actually her stepdaughter.
Right.
In your experience, I know as a judge, I see targeting of children in abuse and neglect cases all the time. Does it make a difference to you potentially that it was not her biological child?
I think it will help the jury you can't make sense of a senseless act. But I think it's easy to jump from, well, she obviously didn't care about this child as much as she cared about her own because they shared no DNA. And that's why she treated her like the evil stepchild.
Jonna, talk to me about what we were just discussing on break. Yeah. Kathy Russin confirmed this defendant was offered the same deal that Aman, the father of the child, actually took, which is a guilty plea, admitting to the murder of the child, but receiving a life sentence versus the death penalty. But we know, obviously, the defendant did not accept or choose to take that plea. What do you think?
I think it's odd. It's odd because she's not mounting a defense. It would make a lot more sense from all of our perspectives if she said, I'm not taking a deal, I'm not guilty, I got these two free, excellent attorneys who are gonna prove that to the jury, and if that were her stance, it would make sense. But to basically conduct a slow plea where she just sits there, you know, drumming her fingers on the table, not asking a question, not putting up a defense, it begs the question, why didn't you take the deal? I suppose one small scenario here that could happen is this jury could find her not guilty, and then we don't have a penalty phase, which would be extremely odd. But maybe they're going to buy maybe they think the father did the whole thing and that she was just standing by, texting about diapers for her other kids. I don't know. This is the most unusual death penalty case I think I've ever witnessed.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, let me throw an alternative to both of you, and here's why. Because I see defendants in court as a judge filling in, hey, we're going to leave it up to God or leave it up to fate, depending on the religion that they express. But we're going to let that decision be made in court. I'm not going to participate actively. I'm not going to say a word, but I'll accept the consequences. Could it be that she feels, she has said in the past, I'm going to leave it up to God? Could she perhaps feel like, it is what it is. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to mount a defense, but I'll accept whatever consequences, potentially even including the death penalty. Jonna, let me start with you.
God doesn't have a pencil. It isn't filling out the verdict form in this case. And you know what? And she didn't leave it up to God when she decided to, assuming that she's guilty, starve her child to death, right? She took God's job away from God. So I don't want to, in fact, when you start screaming, I'm going to leave it up to God when you're in her position, you have to wonder if they're A, competent, B, insane. And I don't mean that to disparage any religion. This is a death penalty trial. There is a dead child.
All right,
You're not
Gabriel,
leaving it up to God.
Jonna, you said something that makes me look back at some of the testimony from this first witness today. There were texts from Sexy Wifey, who's the defendant, to her husband, the father of the child. And she says, Amani dropped bath water on her legs and burned them. She said she wanted to see what it would do. Now, there was no indication that the father did anything about it or responded or reacted. We know, in fact, he said he didn't take the child to the doctor. If I were a jury hearing that, maybe I'd think it is the father's fault. He didn't do anything. She said, listen, Amani did this to herself, and he failed to take the child to the doctor, to respond, to take an active role in treating the child. So could the jury blame the father and let her off?
Could she come across, though, as sympathetic? Could she come across as so much under the thumb of her husband, who shows up in, a jumpsuit, who pled guilty, who's trying to throw her under the bus, for lack of a better term? Could one of those jurors say, I'm not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that she's responsible? Now you end up with a mistrial, and you're not moving on to the penalty phase at that point. You're going to move on to another trial, or maybe convince her to take a plea at that point.
And I do think she could potentially look sympathetic. Look, she's not unattractive. She's dressed well. She isn't looking like a crazy, angry person who would beat and starve a child to death, right? And so does her appearance, how much does the physical appearance of a defendant affect the jury and what they think? Jonna.
I don't think it's going to end up well for her unless what she wants is to be sentenced to death, because potentially, if I were sitting in the jury box, she's showing no compassion whatsoever. There is a dead child that she is standing trial for, and the body was desecrated in such a horrible way. Now, is she going to call herself as a witness to take the stand and just start throwing up all over the place and blame it on her husband? That would be very interesting to see, but we don't know yet.
So, Jonna, let me ask you one last question before we listen to some more of the father's testimony, and that is this. Do you think if there's a conviction and if it goes to sentencing, is in fact the court going to consider that in his plea he got life, so it would be equitable, so to speak, that she got life and not the death penalty?
I do think that's possible. Yeah, I do. And I think that it could help her that she is sitting there just not with any help whatsoever, because you also have to think about, there's going to be an automatic appeal here. So what does the judge want to do to make sure that whatever happens is supposed to happen and it sticks? I think that's an interesting way to look at it.
Automatic appeal, but I have to play devil's advocate. There's only an appeal if she gives permission, if she wants to. What if
That's true.
I guess I struggle with this. Is there really an automatic appeal if there's a conviction? Because she may just accept that fate. That's why this case is fascinating from a legal perspective. Wow is all I can say, Jonna. I'm dying to talk to you about this. Let's just talk about what happened so everybody can understand. We came to it after the attorney had started talking, but here's what we just witnessed. Standby counsel. Now remember, it's standby counsel for the defendant, in this case, Tiffany Moss. They do not represent her, but they are standing by in the event she needs assistance. They made an argument to the court that, listen, she's asked for an ex parte matter with the judge. That means it would be her, it would be the judge. It would not be the jury, it would not be the prosecution. And the judge then said, I want you to tell me a little bit more. Why are you asking for this, Ms. Moss? She basically said, it's something that I want you to hear on, and I'm trying to look at my notes. It would be about going forward from this point. That's as much as she was able to say. The judge said, is there anything else you can tell me without letting the cat out of the bag? And she says no. Now, I'm going to be quite frank and say, I think I, as a judge, putting myself in those shoes for a moment, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying, I think as a judge, you then have what defense argued is a responsibility to have an ex parte meeting. You have a record that can then be sealed to determine what you have to rule. Do you grant or deny based on that conversation? But Jonna, what do you think?
I'm with you 100%. What I find, there are a couple things that are really fascinating about this. First of all, I was on pins and needles, because when you have a defendant in a capital case technically representing herself, standing up, and the judge asked her a question directly, like, what do I need to know? Don't tell me out loud, but what do I need to know? Like, I was afraid she was going to blurt out what she wanted to tell him. That could have been very detrimental to her. But for the judge to not know how to handle this procedurally is a little upsetting since he is presiding over a capital case. But you're right, and I think if we're going to read the tea leaves, what does she want? What is going to affect her going forward? Does she want to enter a plea? Does she want to testify? Does she want to see if she can get the deal back on the table? That if I plead, do I not have to go forward with a penalty phase? These are very important things in a capital case. The judge needs to hear it ex parte, make the ruling, and then let everybody know what's happening in this case.
So no harm, no foul. I know we have to take a break, but from my perspective, no harm, no foul. The court could choose to hear the ex parte, make a ruling, do it under seal, let everybody know, and it's on the record and protects her rights. Those are my thoughts. And I got to tell you, I agree. Often defense motions as a judge, they are not won, they are made, but I don't find appropriate legal basis, factual basis. In this case, we've been talking about, I can see that perhaps the direction this is going to go is that these videos are going to be suppressed. Now, the only way we're going to know is if you continue to watch here on Law and Crime as we continue to cover that motions hearing out of the state of Florida. We also will continue to cover the 10-year-old who was murdered allegedly by the stepmother in the Tiffany Moss case. Now, I'm signing off. No fear, Jesse Weber is here today. He's coming on next as our host. Thank you to Jonna Spilbor. Please stay with us. Jesse's coming on in just a minute.